Let me tell you a story that still makes my heart ache even after so many years. Please sit down and take some time to listen. It was an April afternoon, one of those that stays in your memory. I was sitting on a bench in the hospital garden, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't hold back the tears that insisted on falling. Thank God I was alone at that moment. I could let the tears flow freely without worrying about the pitying glances from others. My Jack, my lifelong companion, was inside, hospitalized. It seems like only yesterday he was that strong, healthy man-me safe harbor. You know, with him by my side, any problem became just a grain of sand. It broke my heart to see my husband like that, so pale, so weak, with those dark circles under his eyes and a voice so faint I could barely hear it. With each passing day, he seemed to wither a little more. In the beginning, I had hope, you know. I thought everything would turn out fine, but gradually I prepared myself for the worst. "Be prepared," said Dr. Thompson. Those words still echo in my head. The disease is progressing too quickly. The supportive treatment isn't working as well anymore. His vital signs are deteriorating, and we still don't have a response from the donor bank. The waiting lists are enormous. You know what's most ironic, my dear? My Jack had never been to a doctor before. He was always as healthy as a bull, rarely even caught a cold since childhood. He was tall and strong, looked like an athlete. When I looked at him with that thick blonde hair, that wide smile with perfect white teeth, and that beautiful fair skin, I would imagine the beautiful children we would have. My Jack had good genetics. Of that I had no doubt. But he never knew his parents, poor thing. He grew up in an orphanage. When he got older and started asking questions about his past, at first no one wanted to answer. Then one day, a nurse told him the truth. His mother, from what they said, was a tall, beautiful woman who had fallen into alcoholism. She already had several children at home and no husband to help. When my Jack was born, she thought she couldn't handle another one and left him at the hospital. She said it was the best she could do for him. My Jack was never adopted. He grew up in that orphanage, but you know something? He never complained when he told me about his childhood. It wasn't in his nature to lament. He preferred to look at the bright side of things. But I, who knew him so well, could read between the lines. It had been difficult, the rare treats that the children shared, the harsh manner of the caretakers. Even so, my dear, my Jack became the gentlest and most sensitive man I've ever known. We met by chance, you know. It was 1971, and I worked as a saleswoman in a shoe store downtown. That day, after a particularly busy week, my colleagues and I decided to go to a church fair to relax a bit. That day, I was feeling beautiful. I had put on my new floral print dress that my mother had sewn for me. I noticed the glances from the young men. You know how it is. The place was lively with music playing through the speakers, people dancing, everyone laughing and chatting around the booths. Some of my friends were invited to dance. For me, first came an older gentleman I politely declined. Then a cocky young man appeared, acting as if he was doing me a favor by inviting me. I preferred to stay with my friends rather than tolerate his type. As the night was coming to an end, I found myself alone near the fishing game booth for a moment. That's when he appeared, dressed simply in a plaid shirt and dress pants, but with that neatly combed blonde hair and the most beautiful green eyes I'd ever seen. His smile, my God, it took my breath away. It had a touch of shyness, you know, but it captivated me immediately. I smiled back, and he approached. "Would the young lady like to try her luck at fishing?" he asked, already extending a fishing rod to me. "Of course," I answered, unable to wipe the smile from my face. You know, my dear, Jack had a sincerity that was like a breath of fresh air. He was different from all the other young men. Being with him felt so natural, so easy. "My name is Jack," he said. "May I know yours?" And so began a conversation that flowed as if we had known each other for years. "Sarah," I replied, feeling I could be completely myself with him. We talked as if the world around us didn't exist. There wasn't that discomfort, you know, that tension when you're meeting someone new. It was as if we already had a connection from past lives. When my friends returned, all smiles and looking at Jack with interested expressions, he was super polite to them. But you know what caught my attention? He didn't pay any attention to Jenny's attempts to get his attention. His eyes were fixed on me. Then a slow, romantic song started playing on the speakers, and Jack invited me to dance right there near the gazebo. Girl, what an attentive, respectful man in a way I had never seen before. In his arms, it was as if the entire world had disappeared and only the two of us existed. I didn't even know how to dance properly, but with him, it seemed like I had been born knowing how. At that moment, I knew nothing about his past or what he did for a living, but I felt that he was trustworthy, that he was a good person. You could see it in his eyes. Suddenly, he said he needed to help at the candy booth where he had promised to lend a hand, but he promised he would return and asked me to wait for him near the gazebo. Oh, how anxious I felt. I wanted him to come back so badly, wanted us to continue that connection that had just been born. The night went on, my friends continued having fun at the booths, but my mind was only thinking about Jack. Every minute that passed without him returning was torture. I wavered between worry and anger. Had something happened? Or had he found another girl? We hadn't even exchanged addresses. There was just that promise in the air that he would return. My heart felt tight. I wanted so much for him to appear again. My mysterious admirer had vanished, and I caught myself looking everywhere, constantly waiting to see that shy smile again. Oh, my dear, let me tell you what happened next. Jenny, so observant, noticed my sadness and asked with that sympathetic voice, "You liked him, didn't you, Sarah?" Silly me. I tried to hide it and responded dismissively. "Not at all. He was nothing special, just another guy. There are many like him out there." But my heart said otherwise. Peter, wanting to join the conversation, said, "There are many young men out there, but you are Sarah. I think he was trying to cheer me up, Oh, my dear, let me tell you how that night went after Jack disappeared. My friends were all excited to go to Anthony's dance hall. Marcia, always full of energy, insisted we go, saying the night was still young. But even with all the excitement from the fair still in me, I had to decline. I explained to the girls that it was getting late, and my parents wouldn't like it if I came home after hours. You know how it was back then. We respected our parents. It wasn't like today when people come and go as they please. I mean, not everyone respected their parents as they should have, but that was their problem and their families, not mine. The girls were a bit disappointed but understood. Jenny even asked me to be careful on my way back. I walked home feeling the cool night breeze. When I was getting close, I saw Joey and Rose playing in the street. They were my younger siblings, always energetic, those two. And with them were our dogs, Buddy and Princess, running and barking, all excited with the neighbors' children. I started calling from a distance. "Joey, Rose, let's go home for dinner. Come on, Buddy, Princess, come here." They didn't even want to stop playing if I'd let them. They would have stayed out until dawn. I had to insist. "Come on, you two, it's time." The dogs came running, jumping on me all happy. When the children came close, I saw they were all dirty and sweaty. They wanted to give me a hug, but I refused. "No way. Go take a bath first, then I'll give you kisses." We entered the house with Buddy and Princess running ahead, barking and wagging their tails. The light in my mom's sewing room was still on. My mom was quite a seamstress. Her sewing room was an improvised space inside the house, but that's where the magic happened with her fairy-like hands. I peeked in, and there she was, concentrated, sewing a beautiful dress. My mom was famous in the neighborhood, you see. Everyone went to her asking her to make clothes. People were always saying that Susan worked miracles with the needle, and it was really true. I had so many exclusive clothes made by her that my friends were even envious, saying they looked like clothes from an upscale boutique. In the kitchen, I smelled that delicious aroma. My father was there preparing dinner, and what good food it was. My goodness. When he saw me, he opened that big smile, called me Princess all cheerfully, and said he was already getting worried because I had been late. I was so touched. My father always got all silly when I arrived. I explained that the fair was lively and gave him a kiss on the cheek. He said he was happy that I had enjoyed myself and told everyone to take a bath while dinner was getting ready. Buddy and Princess stayed circling around the kitchen, waiting for something to fall on the floor. I went to my room, thinking about how that night had been the fair, The dances, the conversations with my friends, and of course, that nice young man who had appeared. But at that moment, with the smell of my father's cooking, the soft sound of my mother's sewing machine, the commotion of my siblings taking a bath, and the happy barking of Buddy and Princess, I felt at peace. Whatever would happen, I had my safe harbor there in that simple little house with the family I loved so much, and that, my dear, was priceless. After that night at the fair, I spent a few days thinking about Jack. You know how it is. But look at this twist of fate. The following week, I was going to work, and who did I meet on the street? Yes, Jack. Girl, my heart nearly jumped out of my mouth. He opened that beautiful smile and came to talk to me. He apologized for disappearing at the fair, explaining that he had a problem with a child, and when he returned, he couldn't find me anymore. He said he spent the rest of the night looking for me. We stood there on the sidewalk, talking as if the world had stopped. I ended up arriving late for work that day, but it was worth every minute. Before we said goodbye, Jack invited me for coffee on Sunday after church, and that's how it started, my dear. From that coffee onward, we began to see each other more often. He would wait for me at the store exit. Sometimes we would take walks around the square, talking about everything and more. With time, Jack told me more about his life. In the beginning, I confess I was a bit scared by some of the things he told me. But you know something? All that he went through without having his parents around actually made him a stronger man. Jack understood that the only way to change his life was by studying. And look at this beautiful thing, his teachers noticed the boy's effort and began to help, giving him extra attention. He always spoke with great affection about his physics teacher. He said that one day, when he became rich and famous, he would thank that teacher in a very special way. With all this effort, Jack achieved something that seemed almost impossible, a scholarship to a first-rate college. But don't think it was easy. The competition was fierce. There were very few scholarships and lots of good people wanting them. The requirements were extremely high, excellent grades, and you had to prove you really needed financial help, which wasn't difficult since he grew up in an orphanage. The worst part was that almost no one really knew how this scholarship thing worked. It wasn't like today when information is everywhere. If it hadn't been for that physics teacher who informed Jack, he wouldn't even have known about the opportunity. But Jack dedicated himself like never before, spending nights studying, barely sleeping. On the day of the scholarship exam, he left home while it was still dark. When the results came out, it was pure joy. Among so many good students, he had stood out and secured one of the few scholarships. And wouldn't you know, he quickly became one of the best students at the college. But don't think it was easy. While studying, he also worked odd jobs to support himself. We were the same age, Jack and I, 19 years old. When he turned 18, they told him he would need to leave the orphanage. So he rented a small guest house at the back of a widowed man's house, Michael. They talked a lot, but look, for all he had already lived and learned in life, he seemed much older than me. I, still living with my parents, felt almost like a little girl next to him. But you know what I noticed? Jack, with all his caring and sensitive manner, what he wanted most was to be loved and accepted. I think because he didn't have that when he was a child, he placed great value on genuine feelings, on people's kindness. After Jack graduated in engineering, one night he surprised me. He asked for my hand in marriage. It was such an emotional moment. He had already won the hearts of my entire family. My mother was always saying what a handsome boy with a good heart he was. He had been through so much, but had a bright future ahead. My father also liked him very much. He said Jack wasn't just any boy, but a real man with goals in life. Our wedding was simple but full of love. My mother, with those fairy hands of hers, made my wedding dress. It turned out beautifully. The party was just for the closest family and friends, at my parents' house. Jack had saved every penny from his first salaries as an engineer, and we did the best we could with what we had. After getting married, we went to live in that simple, small guest house at the back of Michael's house. It was small, but to us, it was a palace. Thank God my mother had taught me everything about taking care of a house. I knew how to cook, wash, iron, sew, everything a good housewife needed to know. Jack was impressed with my homemaking skills. Even so, Jack always made a point of helping at home when he could. After a tiring day at work, he would still find a way to do something, even if it was just washing the dinner dishes. He didn't know how to cook anything, poor thing. Growing up in the orphanage, he never had anyone to teach him. There, he had his tasks, but the kitchen work was reserved only for the girls. But you know what he did? He started asking my father to teach him in his free time. Can you imagine? I thought that was amazing. On weekends, there was Jack in the kitchen with my father. In the beginning, it was quite a mess. He would burn the rice, leave the beans raw, but he didn't give up. I would watch sometimes, give a few tips, since my mother had taught me everything properly, and modesty aside, my cooking was very good. My father was so proud, as if Jack were really his son, and I fell more and more in love with that hard-working man. Even when he made mistakes in the kitchen, we encouraged him. "You're getting better, Jack," we would say, even when the steak was as tough as a shoe sole. It was beautiful to see his effort, you know? It showed how our life was full of learning and dreams. We talked about having a bigger house one day, taking trips, having a large family full of love. Jack, who never had a real family, was always joking. "Do you mind being a mother to many? Maybe 5 or 6? And I, laughing, would respond, "That's too few. I dream of about 10. Can you handle it?" But you know how it is, not everything in life turns out as we plan. The years were passing, and that belly stubbornly refused to grow. While I saw my friends getting pregnant and having their babies, I felt a mixture of joy for them and sadness for myself. It was difficult, you know? Back then, we didn't have all these modern treatments that exist today. We went to several doctors, but they didn't have much explanation. Dr. Oliveira at Mercy Hospital would just furrow his brow and say, "It's just like that sometimes. It takes time. Be patient. It will happen eventually." Some people, especially the gossip women in the neighborhood, were always suggesting miraculous herbal tea, chamomile tea, raspberry leaf tea, even dandelion tea. They said it was good for influencing fertility. There were so many superstitions that I couldn't keep uptying a red ribbon around the waist, sleeping with a spoon under the pillow, taking 3 little jumps after, well, you know. And the promises to saints and Our Lady. I don't think there was a saint in heaven I didn't implore to. We did everything, clinging to hope. The older women in the family, especially my mother and my Aunt Dolores, would come very close and whisper tips that made me turn as red as a tomato. "Stay with your legs up for half an hour after the act," my mother would say, "and don't get out of bed afterward until the next day," Aunt Dolores would add, as if she had discovered the secret of life. And so it went, each with a suggestion more far-fetched than the last. Jack, always so strong, would hug me in difficult moments and say, "Don't lose hope, Sarah. God willing, our child will come." His faith gave me strength to keep trying. You know, each month was an expectation, an anxiety. We would cling to every little sign, every tiny bit of nausea, but when that confirmation came that it hadn't happened, we would console each other. It was difficult, but we faced it together. The dream of having our big family was still alive, even if the path was longer than we had imagined at the beginning. We learned to value every moment together, knowing that with or without children, we were already a family. I was determined to have a child, no matter what it cost. But Jack, always so attentive, started to get worried. One night, after yet another disappointment, after more than a year of trying, he came close to me and gently said it was time to take a break. At first, I was confused. "What do you mean, stop? I can't understand." Jack explained that we should enjoy life, enjoy each other without constantly thinking about this. Deep down, I was also exhausted, tired of having hope every month and then being disappointed, tired of so much worry. "But what about the dream of having children?" I asked about the children, and Jack, in his way, said we could adopt a child from the orphanage. But I quickly replied that I wanted to have my own children. I even said, "Who knows where the children in the orphanage come from?" Jack went quiet for a moment, then remembered that he too was from an orphanage. That hit me in my heart. I didn't want to hurt him. He continued, saying it was okay if I didn't want a child from someone else, that he wouldn't insist, but he also didn't want to see me suffering anymore. At that moment, Jack seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. After all, there was no way to know if it was me or him who couldn't have children. And so it went. But things started to change. Jack, who had always been full of energy, began to get tired for no reason. He would come home from work and go straight to bed, or just sit in the armchair listening to the radio. At first, I didn't give it much importance. I thought it was just work fatigue, but it became increasingly frequent. Soon he was arriving home, pale, breathless, completely exhausted. His appetite worsened, and he was rapidly losing weight. What scared me the most was when bruises began to appear on his body without any apparent reason. That wasn't normal, and I began to get really worried. I insisted that he needed to see a doctor. I had even made an appointment and told him not to dare miss it. Jack smiled and said he was already planning to go soon. I was worried about my husband, but was sure that nothing serious was happening. I thought the doctors would diagnose some vitamin deficiency, prescribe some medicine, suggest some walks. Maybe we would spend a few days at the beach to rest, and everything would be fine. However, we weren't prepared. Jack was diagnosed with leukemia by the hospital doctor. The doctor explained that it was a type of blood cancer. Back then, hearing the word cancer was like receiving a death sentence. We barely understood what it was, we just knew it was a terrible disease. When the news spread, people began to look at us differently. Some neighbors even distanced themselves, as if cancer were contagious. That hurt us deeply. My parents were devastated. My father, even being a simple man, couldn't accept it. He asked everyone if they knew any doctor who could help better, who knew about some new treatment. It was when the priest of our parish talked about Dr. Thompson, who sometimes provided free care at the church. He had a reputation for knowing the most modern treatments. When Dr. Thompson saw Jack, he confirmed what we already knew but talked about some new research they were doing abroad. He mentioned a treatment called chemotherapy that was very strong and dangerous. The protocols were more aggressive and the side effects more intense than current treatments due to the side effects and high toxicity of the medications used, but sometimes it worked. He also mentioned that they were studying something called a bone marrow transplant, but it was still very experimental. Jack, brave as always, said he wanted to try everything possible. I was afraid. The idea of losing him terrified me, but at the same time, any chance was better than none. We knew it would be a difficult fight. I spent nights awake, praying, thinking about everything we had lived through and the future we dreamed of. It was hard to see Jack, always so strong, now weak and dejected, but even so, he tried to cheer me up. He said we would win this battle. Our life turned upside down, you know. Jack's disease worsened quickly, and he had to be hospitalized. I practically moved into the hospital, only going home to shower and change clothes. I slept in a chair beside his bed. I didn't want to leave him alone, not even for a minute. My parents offered to take turns with me, and I accepted, of course. In the few hours I spent at home, I would sleep on Jack's side of the bed, cover myself with his blanket, wear his clothes. It was a way to feel close even when far away. Dr. Thompson explained more about the new treatment, bone marrow transplant. He said it was Jack's only chance, but it was difficult to find a compatible donor. Since Jack was from an orphanage, he had no relatives to take the test. I said to him, if we had managed to have a child, perhaps. But he explained that bone marrow donation by children was generally not recommended because it was a procedure with infections, bleeding, and other complications. For a child, these risks could be even greater because their body is developing and might be more sensitive to the effects of surgery and anesthesia. So I breathed a little easier since that wasn't the case. One night, after an exhausting day at the hospital, I was leaving. I had stopped near the hospital to dry my tears before catching the bus when I overheard two nurses talking. I recognized them from the floor where Jack was hospitalized. One of them said she felt sorry for Jack. I froze. The other agreed, saying he was a good and gentle young man, but it was clear he wouldn't last much longer, that he was getting worse each day. I felt my heart tighten. I almost came out of my hiding place to argue with them, to tell them they were wrong, that Jack would get better, but my legs went weak. I had to lean against the wall. I returned home that night completely devastated. The words of those nurses wouldn't leave my head. It was as if they had confirmed my greatest fear, but I couldn't give up. Jack needed me to be strong, and I would fight for him until the end. Oh, my dear, this reminds me of the nights I spent kneeling by the hospital bed. Every night before sleeping, I would pray with all the strength of my heart. I would ask God for a sign, you know. I wanted him to prepare me for what was to come for my Jack. It was difficult, but I would say, Lord, if it is your will to take my beloved, give me strength to accept it. Sometimes my voice would catch in my throat, tears would flow, but I would continue asking. I wanted to be ready for whatever God had planned, even if it meant saying goodbye to the love of my life. It wasn't easy, you see, but faith gave me a strength I didn't even know I had. And that night at home was no different. I knelt in front of Jack's side of the bed and once again asked God for a sign. For the first time in a long time, I fell into a deep and peaceful sleep. I had such a vivid dream that upon waking, I wished I could return to it. In the dream, we lived in a cozy house in a charming little town. I was walking through a verdant meadow wearing a pretty summer dress, carrying a basket full of bread, butter, and fruits. In the distance, I could see Jack working in a field, harvesting hay. Then I heard the voice of a child shouting, "Mommy, wait for me!" A little girl of about 5 ran from the house in my direction, laughing. She wore a little hat and a summer dress, her brown hair swinging as she ran across the field. Jack appeared, playfully pretending to chase her. The girl laughed louder and ran faster. I opened my arms, calling her to hurry. The girl ran into my arms. Jack arrived, trying to lift us both, but he tripped, and we all fell on the grass laughing. It was such a beautiful dream that I didn't want to wake up, but I had rested enough and woke up. For the first time since I learned about my beloved's serious illness, I felt a renewed energy. The dream had cheered me up. Even if just for a moment, I picked up some fruits and went to visit Jack. He was too weak to sit up in bed, but he still managed to greet me with a smile and a wink. "You seem especially cheerful today," he observed, looking at me. "I'm just in a good mood," I replied, sitting beside him and holding his hand, which he squeezed weakly. I was eager to tell him about my dream, but I was afraid it might be too much for him at that moment, so I decided to contain myself. As Jack fell asleep, I continued holding his hand, looking at his peaceful face while silent tears ran down my face. Upon leaving the hospital around noon, I felt the need to take a walk and breathe some fresh air. As I walked, my thoughts turned to the uncertain future and the painful realization that I might never have children with my Jack. I remembered the conversations we had about having children and what Jack once said about children in orphanages. Suddenly, I stopped. An idea hit me like lightning. I felt something different, as if I had found a purpose. I ran back home. As soon as I arrived, I grabbed my phone book and went to knock on Michael's door, the owner of the house where we were tenants. I asked to borrow his phone, explaining it was urgent. I began calling various orphanages, explaining my situation. There weren't many nearby, but one of them invited me for a visit the next day. I arrived very early at the orphanage. The children were still sleeping, so I couldn't meet them right away, but Mrs. Peterson, the person in charge of the orphanage, explained that adoption normally took a long time, sometimes years. I said I was ready to adopt any child, that I really wanted to be a mother and give Jack the chance to be a father, even if for a short time. Mrs. Peterson began to explain that the process was quite bureaucratic and lengthy. There was extensive documentation to be presented, as well as interviews and rigorous social investigations. She also said there were strict criteria for prospective adopters, and they were quite rigid. It was common to require couples to be married for at least 5 years, to have a minimum age, and to prove financial stability. But Mrs. Peterson understood our special situation and said she would try to speed up the process, though she warned it would still take a few months at minimum. I accepted. There was no other way. As I walked through the corridors, I saw that the children had woken up and were playing outside. My heart filled with joy at seeing them, but when I got near the gate, my eyes stopped on a particular girl. This girl was identical to the child I had seen in my dream. I was paralyzed, feeling a strange shiver. Mrs. Peterson noticed my fixed gaze and asked if everything was all right. Still recovering from the shock, I took a while to respond. I looked at her, not quite understanding the question. I said everything was fine and asked if I could go talk to that girl. I pointed to the child. Mrs. Peterson, with a warm smile, agreed. I approached the girl who was engrossed in playing with her rag dolls. When I got close, she looked up and greeted me with a smile. I returned the smile and complimented her dolls. "I love your dolls," I said to the little girl. All happy, she began telling me about each of her dolls and the stories she invented. She even had one where a doll was sad because her friend was leaving. Mrs. Peterson came close and quietly told me about Emily. Poor thing, her mother had problems with alcohol and easy living, you know? That's why the little one was in the orphanage. She had been there for a long time. Mrs. Peterson said people were afraid to adopt a child with a father or mother who drank. I learned that Emily had already seen many children leave, but no one wanted to take her. The little one's sadness wasn't even for herself, but because her friends were leaving. That broke my heart. Mrs. Peterson saw my expression and said she would do everything for the adoption. In the days that followed, time seemed to stand still. I was waiting for news, imagining how I would tell my Jack. "Oh, my dear, let me tell you something I found out later. You know this adoption process? Well, it's not easy. I discovered they went after all sorts of references. My goodness, you can't imagine. They went to the parish we attended to talk with Father Paul and the church people. They went to my father and mother's house to interview them. Poor things must have been nervous. At Jack's workplace, too, they talked with his colleagues, with his boss, everyone. And look at this. They even went to the college where Jack studied and talked to his professors from years ago. Can you imagine? That's why it takes months. I was amazed when I found out all this. We don't realize it, but they investigate our lives thoroughly before letting us adopt a child. It's a very serious process indeed, but I understand, right? They want to make sure the child goes to a good home with good people. When I think about all this, I get emotional. So many people talking about us, telling our story. It's as if our entire life had prepared us to receive Emily, you know? God writes straight with crooked lines, doesn't he? In that routine, I had gone to visit Jack in the hospital as I always did. When I was returning home, I saw Michael standing at the gate with an anxious face, as if he had been waiting for a long time. As soon as he saw me, he waved excitedly. "Mrs. Sarah, how good that you've arrived," he shouted from the gate. I went to him, quickening my steps, curious to know what was so important. "Mrs. Sarah, they called from the orphanage while you were out," he said, barely containing his excitement. "They asked you to call back as soon as possible. It seems like good news." My heart jumped. Could it be what I was waiting for? Poor Michael was almost as anxious as I was. He was a widower, you know, and always hoped to see us happy. He stood looking at me with that face of someone who wanted to know more. "Thank you, Michael," I said, already turning to enter. "You don't know how much good you've done me." I ran inside and went straight to the phone. I called the orphanage with trembling hands. When Mrs. Peterson answered and gave me the news, I nearly fell over with joy. I ran out again, passing Michael, who was behind me, listening to everything with a wide smile. "Is it good news, Mrs. Sarah?" he asked. "Yes, Michael," I replied, almost crying with joy. "It's the best news in the world." And off I went, hurrying to the orphanage to get my Emily. Michael stayed there, smiling, happy to see that something good was happening. He was a good man, you see, the kind you don't find much anymore these days. When Jack was hospitalized, Michael no longer accepted the money for our rent. He saw that Michael and I were living with my mother at the time, realized we were having financial difficulties, and suggested I go live with her. But Michael almost begged me to stay there with him, saying he would help us with the offer of not having to pay rent anymore until the day our lives returned to normal. I accepted because I saw that he didn't want to lose contact with us. He had 4 children, all married, and received visits from them practically only on Father's Day and Christmas. Poor thing, he didn't deserve that. I arrived at the orphanage with my heart in my throat. Mrs. Peterson took me to where Emily was. When I saw her sitting in a corner playing with the dolls, my heart nearly jumped out of my mouth. I crouched down near her and said we could go get an ice cream. Her eyes lit up. Children are all the same, aren't they? She nodded, her smile growing bigger. I extended my hand to her, and after a moment, her little hand held mine. It was as if we had made an agreement without saying a word. When we left the orphanage, I felt Emily squeezing my hand a little tighter. You could see she was excited, but also afraid of this new life. I explained to her that she could call me Mom or just Sarah, whatever she preferred. Emily smiled but stayed quiet. I told her about Jack, that he was sick. On the way to the hospital, we kept talking. It felt like I had been her mother forever, you know? The conversation was going so well. Arriving at the hospital, I entered Jack's room with my heart racing. I was nervous, but full of hope. I led Emily by the hand to his bed. Jack was there, weak, but when he opened his eyes and saw me and the little girl, he had a look of astonishment. "Who is this, Sarah?" he asked, his voice weak but curious. I took a deep breath, my eyes full of tears, and introduced them. "Jack, this is our daughter, Emily. Emily, this is Jack, your father." Jack was surprised, looking from me to Emily, who was standing there all shy but with a sparkle in her eyes. The room fell into silence, everyone not knowing what to do. Then Jack's face became calmer when he looked at Emily. "Hi, Emily," he spoke with affection. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Emily, seeing his manner, approached the bed. Jack extended his hand to her, weak but with a smile on his face. It was a moment I will never forget. Afterward, I took her to our house. It was strange not to stay there with Jack, but now I had to take care of the little girl, too. My mother would soon arrive to spend the night with him. When we were leaving the hospital, Emily became quiet. Suddenly, she spoke softly. "He's not called Jack." I was confused and asked, "What do you mean, dear?" "The man in the hospital, he has another name," she replied. That worried me. To distract the child, I told her that the next day we would go to my parents' house. I told her she would meet my siblings, and that my parents already knew about her and were eager to see her. Now, my dear, let me tell you about that special day when Emily arrived home. It was such a beautiful thing that even today I get emotional just remembering. We were arriving, and poor Michael must have heard the noise of the gate. He suddenly appeared, all anxious to meet Emily. He looked at her with tears in his eyes and said she could call him Grandpa. It was so beautiful to see. He was so lonely that he was always getting emotional. He invited us in. He had made homemade bread, the table was all set, so of course we didn't refuse. We stayed there talking for a long time. Later, we went to our little house in the back. You know we didn't have a room just for her, right? She was going to sleep on the sofa bed in the kitchen. Our house was half kitchen, half living room, you know how it is. But Emily, that little angel, didn't seem to mind. She settled in as if she had known the place for a long time. Later I made a little dinner for us. Girl, you should have seen how Emily ate with gusto. After dinner she took a bath. You know, I had wanted a child for so long. I was so happy I could hardly contain myself. When it was time to sleep, I explained to her that in our house, we always pray before going to bed. I asked her to kneel with me, and we said a prayer together. She stayed quiet, paying attention. I prayed out loud for her to learn. Then I asked if she wanted to sleep on the sofa or in the bed with me, on Jack's side. You know what she chose? She wanted to stay close to me. She lay there by my side, and I felt that she was beginning to feel at home. That night, lying there with my Emily by my side, I thanked God so much. I looked at her sleeping and thought, this is it. Now we are a real family. The next day, I dressed Emily very nicely to meet my parents. When we arrived, my mother was still at the hospital, so my father opened the door with tears in his eyes. I saw him trying to hide his emotion. "This is Emily," I said, gently pushing the girl forward. My father immediately crouched down. "How beautiful you are, my little granddaughter," he said with an emotional voice. Then my father cleared his throat and said, "Welcome to the family, little one." Emily, all shy, gave a little smile. My siblings appeared too, making a fuss. Rose even brought a present, a new doll for her. I left Emily there, getting to know the family, and went to the orphanage. I needed to talk to Mrs. Peterson. I took the bus and arrived there almost out of breath. Mrs. Peterson, I need to know more about Emily's past, I said as soon as I saw her. She shook her head. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sarah, but I can't give that kind of information. I begged, Mrs. Peterson, it's a matter of life or death for my husband. It seems she knows him. You don't understand. Something strange is happening. And so I told her how it was at the hospital. Mrs. Peterson looked at me for a while. You could see she was thinking. Then I decided to tell her I would pay for the information if necessary. She was quite upset. You offend me, ma'am, she said. After a sigh, she said, All right, Mrs. Sarah, I'll tell you what I know, but this stays just between us. I run the risk of losing my job, but if it's a matter of life or death, I'll tell you. I stood there on edge, waiting for her to speak. Mrs. Peterson took a deep breath and began, Look, Mrs. Sarah, it's not much that I know. Emily's parents, from what I was told, had serious problems with alcohol. They lived drunk, you know? One day, a neighbor brought the girl here, said he couldn't bear to see the child suffering anymore. We needed to know if what the neighbor said was true. When we reached the address he left us, we confirmed immediately that he was telling the truth. And this neighbor, do you know who he is? I asked anxiously. Mrs. Peterson hesitated a bit but ended up telling me, Yes, I do. His name is Michael. I even have his address noted here. When she gave me the address, I could hardly believe it. It was in a small town a few hours from there. The next day, I left Emily with my parents and went after this Michael. The place, God help me, was all abandoned. There was even a junk depot nearby. I stopped in front of the house and called out, Hello, hello. Nothing, no one answered. I gathered my courage and opened the gate. I went to the porch and saw that the door was unlocked. I knocked hard. Suddenly I heard a voice from inside. Come in. Can't you see the door is open? I thought the owner was expecting a visit and entered. What a sad house. Smell of mold, dust everywhere, broken furniture, things thrown all around. Suddenly I heard footsteps. A man appeared at the door. When I laid eyes on him, I almost fell backward. The man's face took my breath away in surprise. He had the same features as my Jack the identical eyes, the cheekbones, the curve of the eyebrows, even a mark on the neck. The resemblance was astonishing. But you could see that his life had been harder. His eyes were red, his face full of wrinkles, burned by the sun, and a poorly kept beard. And who are you? He asked, not rudely, just curious. I didn't know what to say, so I said that maybe it would be better to show a photo of my husband. He shrugged and came closer. Up close, the resemblance to Jack was even more impressive. I stood looking, fascinated. You're staring at me too much. Can you tell me what's going on? He asked directly. It's a long and complicated story, I replied, trying to smile. Looking at you now, I have no doubt you and my husband are identical. I extended the photo for him to take. Michael looked at Jack's photo carefully. His hands trembled a little, but he tried not to show it. Did you know you had a brother? I asked, hoping he was indeed Jack's relative and could save him from the disease. I knew, replied Michael, nodding slowly. His eyes were shining with tears, but I never thought I would find him. Michael paused and said, Sit here in this chair, as if controlling himself, and began to tell his story. My God in heaven, what a terrible situation. Listen, my dear, it breaks the heart. He said that at the time, he was barely 8 years old, but he was already the only man in the family. His half-sisters were always reminding him of this, making him clean and even cook when he was only 5 or 6 years old. There was no father in the family. His mother, Mary, was a woman of easy life, if you understand me. She probably didn't even remember who the father of whom was, with so many men passing through there. Life was difficult for Michael, with his mother always altered by drink, the house full of strange people, and the older sisters mistreating him. Michael told me that his mother, Mary, turned a blind eye when the men who went to the house took advantage of the older girls, all for a few dollars. And you know something horrible? With time, the girls ended up falling into that life too. But then they got angry with their mother. They no longer gave her money or anything. They were rebellious, and rightly so. Mary would complain, These ungrateful ones after all I did for them, Now they don't help me with anything." You could see that Michael suffered telling this. He was very little at the time, but he remembered everything. He said he wanted to run away, make a cabin in the woods just to get away from that whole situation. Then Mary got pregnant again. She complained all the time. "Where am I going to find space for another mouth? I'm not even going to get this newborn from the maternity ward. I'll just write a refusal, and that's it." Michael, even as a child, was terrified by the idea of a baby being abandoned. He was certain that this time it would be a boy, a little brother for him. "I could barely speak," he continued telling his story, and my heart got tighter and tighter. He said that growing up among the sisters made him want a brother very much. He said he would teach his little brother everything that boys like: fishing, making wood sculptures with a small knife, climbing trees, playing marbles. The two would understand each other like no one else. Michael wouldn't feel alone anymore in that house full of people. "Mom, don't leave the baby, please." Michael would plead almost every day. If Mary was in a good mood, she would laugh and joke. If she was in a bad mood, she would even hit him for insisting, pulling his ears until they were raw. When the time came, Mary returned home thinner, more energetic after a week without drinking, and empty-handed. Michael looked at his mother and felt tears burning in his eyes. In the end, she had indeed abandoned his little brother. The boy would be sent to an orphanage or to a good family, never knowing he had a brother who dreamed and waited so much for him. Michael cried with pain, with despair at not being able to change anything. At this point, I was already crying like a child with so much pity. Michael continued telling, and each word of his was like a stab in my heart. "The years went by, Mrs. Sarah. I stayed there at home, managing as best I could. Mother drank more and more. And there was something even worse that Mother did. I would hear her talking and see her doing. She got pregnant other times, you know, but she learned to get rid of the baby before it started to grow in her belly. She would take a strange herbal concoction and then almost die in pain, twisting all over. So Jack was the last baby she actually had. My God, I simply couldn't believe the horrors I was hearing." He didn't stop there. He continued, "By then, my sisters had already disappeared into the world a long time ago. When I was 12, a lady from social services appeared and said my mother was no longer able to take care of me. At the time, I thought, what took them so long to realize this? Poor Michael. They took me to an orphanage. In the beginning, I was scared, but later, you know, I even liked it. There were clean clothes, meals on time, people who really looked after me, and what I liked most of all were the friends I made. I was never adopted. I stayed there until I was 18. When I left, I found out that my mother had died of liver cirrhosis due to drinking. No one knew about my sisters. I returned to this old house that was abandoned, falling apart. I was shocked by everything. I had never heard such barbarities. I tried to start a new life," he continued. "I found odd jobs here and there, but it was difficult, you understand? Without education, without anyone to give me a hand, I managed as best I could. I gardened, cut firewood, that sort of thing. You know, my dear, I used to wonder about such things. There I was, wanting so much to have a child, praying every day, and God wouldn't give me one. Yet that woman, Mary, who didn't care about her own children, was constantly blessed with babies in her womb. It was something to think about. And it wasn't just her. The orphanages are always full. So many people having children without being able to raise them, without wanting to raise them. It's too sad to see all these children abandoned without a real home. But now, I understand that God had a greater plan. He knew that Emily would need me, and I needed her. Sometimes we don't understand the Lord's ways at the time, but in the end, everything fits together." After hearing all that from Michael, I felt my heart tighten. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears, and began to tell my part. "Ah, Michael, life takes such turns that we can't even imagine. Jack really grew up in the orphanage. He lived there until he was 18, just like you. Certainly, you didn't meet each other because the orphanage he was taken to was in the capital. Since I married Jack, we dreamed of having children, but the years went by and nothing happened. It was such a sadness. One day, Jack suggested that I adopt a child. At first, I didn't want to know. I thought it wouldn't be the same. Then one night I had a dream. I dreamed of a little girl calling me Mom. I woke up crying. I felt in my heart that it was an answer from God to my prayers. When I arrived at the orphanage, I saw Emily, that little girl. I'll tell you, it seemed like a miracle. I looked into her eyes and felt she was my daughter. I didn't think twice and started the adoption process right away. When I had spoken the name Emily, I saw on his face that he knew her. His expression changed, but he was waiting for me to tell everything. Well, and my Jack, your brother, poor thing, is there in the hospital fighting against this cursed disease, leukemia. It's a type of cancer. The doctors said he needs a bone marrow transplant. You know, relatives, especially siblings, have a higher probability of being compatible for donating bone marrow. This is because they share part of the genetic material, increasing the chances. His eyes widened as if to say, I can donate. It's only been a day that Emily is with me. I took her to the hospital to meet Jack, and that's when, Michael, something happened that left me astounded. Emily looked at Jack, and then said that he wasn't called Jack, that he had another name. I was so intrigued by that I started digging, you know? And look where I ended up here at your door. When I finished speaking, I saw that Michael had tears in his eyes again. He stood there, trying to understand all this crazy story I was telling. Mrs. Sarah, he began, you adopted little Emily. The truth is that I am Emily's uncle. Her mother, my sister Margaret, returned home when I was already living here. She led a life that wasn't good, you know. She didn't even care about the girl. Even with the sad end of my mother, she was following the same path of alcohol. One day, she disappeared into the world with some man, leaving poor Emily with me as if she were an old package. Since I had grown up in an orphanage, you know, I believed it was a good place, that they would take good care of her, better than staying with me, who barely had enough to eat. Not to mention that I would go to work and she would have to stay alone. It weighed on my heart, but the best I could do was take her there. I didn't want to take her to the orphanage where I grew up. I took her to the capital. The little one was about 3.5 years old at the time. How does the little mischief remember my face? Mrs. Peterson, who was in charge, seemed like a good person, so I said I was a neighbor who couldn't stand to see the child suffering anymore. I left the address of this house for her. One day they came here. I hid in the back. They saw that there was no one and left. Later I saw them talking to Mr. Peter from a distance, and he certainly said that this house here was no condition for a child to live in. But my initial plan was to go there from time to see if she was adopted, you know? I did this thinking of her good, Mrs. Sarah, but every day I thought about my niece, wondering if I had done the right thing. When he said this, I was speechless. That man had given up raising his niece, all to give her a better chance. My heart felt so tight that I can't even describe it. The tears were already flowing freely down his face. I was so moved by the story that I stood up, took his hand, gave him a tight hug. Michael, you did a great job. Emily is a wonderful girl and will be our daughter thanks to you. As I said this, I felt my eyes filling with tears again. What a sad story, my God. Oh, my dear, that moment was so emotional, such a tremendous revelation. I felt the presence of God, which still gives me goosebumps just remembering. After I told everything to Michael, we stayed there trying to compose ourselves. Let me tell you exactly how it was after I explained everything to Michael about Jack's disease and the urgent need for the transplant. He was surprised, but didn't hesitate. When can I meet him? Michael asked, all anxious to help. Right now, if you can, I said. Jack is in the hospital, and every minute counts. I hope it's not inconvenient for you, Michael replied immediately. Of course it's not inconvenient. Let me just change quickly, and I'll go with you to the hospital. I want to meet my brother, and do whatever is necessary to help him. I was so moved by his willingness. While Michael went to get ready, I was thinking about how to tell Jack. My heart was pounding. We took a bus. I had to pay his fare, he didn't have a cent. Arriving at the hospital, before entering the room, I explained to Michael that Jack still didn't know anything. I asked him to wait a little outside while I prepared my husband for the news. When I entered the room, my father was there with Jack. When he saw me, he opened that beautiful smile, even being so weak. "Hey dear, you took a while," he said, looking for Emily by my side and asking, "Where is our little Emily?" I began to speak very slowly. "I have incredible news for you. I think I found a possible donor." His eyes widened immediately. I continued telling everything from the beginning. I talked about Emily, about when we left the hospital that day, that she said Jack wasn't Jack, that he was another man. That's when I started looking, you know. And I can't believe what I discovered. "Jack, you have a brother, and he is here, right out there, waiting to meet you." The room fell into silence. Jack and my father looked at each other, not knowing what to say. "Can I call him to come in?" I asked, with my heart in my hand. Jack nodded, still unable to speak. I went to the door and called Michael. When Michael entered, it was as if time stopped. He looked at Jack, his eyes full of emotion, and said, "Good afternoon, Jack. I'm Michael, your brother." The rest you can imagine. It was such a beautiful, such a wonderful moment that even today I get emotional just remembering. Seeing those two meeting without even knowing of each other's existence, oh my dear, it was like seeing a miracle happening right in front of me. I still didn't have confirmation that he could be the donor my husband needed, but with my unwavering faith, I felt it deep in my being. I knew that God had placed Emily and Michael in our lives, and it was not for nothing. Oh my dear, let me tell you a story that always moves me when I remember. Dr. Thompson and his team called Michael to do some tests, to take some blood. We were in that anxiety, you know, everyone praying with a tight heart, hoping it would work out. And girl, it did work out. Michael was the perfect donor for Jack. When the doctor gave the news, it was a joy you can't imagine. We hugged, cried, thanked. It seemed like the weight of the world had been lifted from our shoulders. Then began all that preparation for the surgery. Things at that time were a bit different from what you see today. Michael had to be hospitalized for an entire day because they were going to take the marrow from his hip bone. Poor thing. He had an annoying pain afterward, but he hardly complained. Just knowing he was going to help his brother made him happy. He didn't care about anything else. Now Jack, oh my dear, he spent more time in the hospital. The surgery was long, and we were outside all the time, praying with faith. When it finished, the doctor came to talk to us. He said everything had gone well, but Jack would need to stay in the hospital for a while because his body was still fragile, recovering. In the first days, it was quite something. We could only enter the room all protected with masks, gloves, you know? Jack was weak, but you could already see in his eyes that he was reacting, improving. Michael, thank God, recovered quickly. In a week, he was already walking around, wanting to see his brother all the time. But poor Jack took it slower. He spent almost 2 months in the hospital, and we took turns. 1 hour it was me, another hour my father, my mother, and even Michael, so that Jack was never alone. When Jack finally was discharged, after a long 8 months in total, counting the surgery, my Jack could breathe the air outside that hospital. But the doctors soon warned that recovery would be long. In the first months, he had to return to the hospital every week for examinations to see how he was doing. Oh, my dear, this part of the story was quite complicated. Let me tell you exactly how it happened. Anyone who thinks that after the hospital everything was fine in our lives is mistaken. We faced many challenges, you know? After Jack returned home, the closest friends began to visit him. It was beautiful to see the care everyone had. Then Michael, during one of these visits, had an idea. He invited us to live in the front house while he would go to the house in the back. He said there was more space there, especially now with Emily. She would have her own room. We accepted. We moved a few things since both houses already had furniture. In the beginning, everything was going well. We were taking care of Jack. Emily was happy. It seemed things had settled down. But then, my dear, the trouble started. One day the phone rang, and I answered. It was one of Michael's sons, Richard, asking for his father. That's when he found out from my mouth that we were living in the front house. I couldn't imagine the confusion this would cause. The following weekend, everyone arrived, children, daughters-in-law, grandchildren, a whole crowd, and that's when all hell broke loose. They started saying all sorts of nonsense, saying we were taking advantage of Michael. Just imagine, we hadn't even asked for anything. He was the one who offered. But since I was in need, I was foolish to accept. I didn't think of the consequences. These troublemakers were saying that we were trying to take Michael's house, that we only wanted his money. All lies. We just wanted to take care of Jack and have our family united. But what hurt me the most, what really got to me, was when they called Jack a moribund. That was too much for me. I couldn't take it and started arguing. Poor Michael was crying, trying to explain that I was family, that he had proposed the exchange, but that it wasn't forever. He told his children they didn't need to worry, but they wouldn't listen. It was as if he were invisible there. The poor man had no say in anything. They threw us out of there, threatening to call the police if we didn't leave by Monday. Can you believe such a thing? You know, my dear, sometimes people don't understand what real family is. We didn't want anything material. We just wanted to be close, to take care of each other. But some people only think about money, about inheritance, even though the person isn't even dead yet. And off we went, lock, stock, and barrel, to my mother's house. I had never felt so humiliated in my life. They could have well talked. We would have left peacefully. But they came for a war, you know. Jack was devastated, feeling guilty. Michael was between a rock and a hard place, divided between us and his children. And I was angry, hurt, feeling wronged. You know, my dear, sometimes people are blinded by jealousy, by greed. They couldn't see that we only wanted Michael's well-being. They didn't understand that family goes beyond blood. And poor Michael, going through all this confusion, I was certain he would be left alone after all. It was a difficult time for all of us. Jack was upset, thinking he had caused problems. We had to explain 1,000 times that it wasn't his fault. After all that confusion, we ended up going to my parents' house. We stayed in that little room that was mine when I was single. It was cramped, but we made do. The important thing was to be together and take care of Jack. How good it was to have him at home. Just imagine how tiring it was for us to take turns so much there in that hospital. And of course, there was my Emily, who had barely left the orphanage and was already going through all that. The good part was that she got along well with my siblings. They were older than her, but they understood each other. We took care of Jack with all the love in the world. We made good, hearty food, the way the doctor had recommended. Those thick soups full of vegetables, that's what we had most at home. And we helped him do some light exercises to regain his strength. Michael started working at the market, carrying boxes of fruits. It was a heavy job, but he didn't complain. And look at this good thing. Every time he visited us, he brought bags full of fruits, vegetables, and legumes. You know how markets are, right? There are always those things they think can't be sold anymore and would throw away. Michael, clever as he was, picked up all that and brought it to us. They were good things. Just because they had a little spot here, a slightly wilted leaf there, they would waste them. His visits were always welcome, not only for the company, but because of all those fruits and vegetables. It helped a lot with our expenses, you know? And Jack was all happy to see his brother, even if for a short time. The bad part was that he had to make a small trip because we lived far away. And look at this funny thing that happened. My friend Jenny started visiting us more often. At first, I thought it was just to give support, but later I realized she was interested in Michael. And wouldn't you know it, he was interested in her too. It was beautiful to see that romance being born there amid so much difficulty. Time went by, and Jack was getting much better. Each day he was stronger, more animated. It was a blessing to see him recovering like that, walking and eating on his own. Then one day, we received a surprise visit. It was an old professor of Jack's. He was happy to see how well Jack was recovering and made a proposal. He said he would give Jack a good job at the company where he worked as soon as Jack was ready. You should have seen Jack's face when he heard this. His eyes shone in a way I hadn't seen for a long time. It was as if he had gained a new hope. You know, it was a difficult time, but also full of good things. We were together, Jack was getting better. Michael had found Jenny. And now there was this job promise. It was as if God was showing us that after the storm comes the calm. About 20 days after that visit from the professor, Jack got all dressed up. My goodness, how handsome that man looked when he got fixed up. He went to meet the professor and returned with wonderful news. He had gotten a job with an even better salary than he received before the disease. It was pure joy. Jack and I agreed that I wouldn't work outside the home. I would stay at home taking care of Emily. I enrolled her in the school where I had studied when she turned 7. I would take her there every day myself. The path passed near Michael's house, so we always stopped there to see him. Girl, you should have seen Michael's happiness when we arrived. He would open that big smile, hug, and kiss little Emily. She had been calling him Grandpa for quite some time. And you know something? Emily was already calling Jack and me Dad and Mom. It had been a little while, too. Every time she said Dad or Mom, my heart would melt. Michael rented the house in the back to new tenants, and you can imagine, right, that they soon became friends. That was good because that way he wasn't so alone. Now his children, oh, they continued the same way. They hadn't changed much after all that ruckus. But Michael didn't let that interfere with his happiness. He said we were the family he chose to have close by. I'm going to skip ahead in time now because incredible things happened to me. I'm sure you weren't expecting this one. Time went by, and at a certain point, Michael, Jack's brother, was already married to Jenny. It was so beautiful to see those two together, and they didn't waste time, you see. They had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. It was so beautiful to see all those children. They ended up living in the back of Jenny's mother's house. Poor thing, she was a widow, so it was good to have her daughter and son-in-law nearby. They built a little house there in the back, you know. They used the money from the sale of their mother's house for that. That old house wasn't worth much, you see, but the little it gave helped a lot. Jack didn't even want to know about his part of that money. Thank God we weren't in need. He insisted that Michael keep it all. Michael made good use of that money. He built a nice little house for the children to have space to grow. It was small but cozy. It was a pleasure to see how happy they were there. You know, my dear, seeing Michael with that beautiful family of his gave me a joy in my heart. After everything he and Jack had gone through, separated for so long, it was as if God was compensating, giving double all the blessings. We were always visiting each other. It was a real celebration when everyone got together. Well, now what I'm going to tell you will surprise you. Time went by again, and before I knew it, I was already 43 years old. My Emily, that little girl we adopted, was already a 24-year-old young woman, married for 2.5 years and expecting her second child. It was pure joy. Then out of nowhere, I started feeling unwell. It was a terrible malaise. I felt waves of heat that came from nowhere. I would sweat cold sometimes, get irritated for no reason. There were days I would wake up with a terrible headache. My sleep got all messed up. There were nights I couldn't sleep at all, and my breasts became swollen and painful. At first, I thought it was just tiredness or maybe the beginning of menopause. After all, at 43 years old, it was to be expected, right? My mother told me that's how it had happened to her, so I had already accepted it. But the symptoms weren't going away. There were days I even felt nauseous. I decided to go to the doctor, more for peace of mind. I thought he would say it was indeed menopause, and that would be it. But when I got there, the doctor did some tests, and surprise. I was pregnant, about 10 weeks, more or less 2 months. I was in shock. What? Me? Pregnant after so long? For years, I had resigned myself to never having children. We had even stopped trying, you know. We thought it wasn't meant to be. I left the doctor's office not knowing whether to laugh or cry. It was a mixture of joy, fear, surprise, all together. You know, my dear, sometimes life surprises us when we least expect it. There I was, thinking it was the end of a phase with menopause coming, and it was actually the beginning of another beautiful thing. It was crazy, but a good kind of crazy. I, grandmother of 2, and first-time mother at the same time. Who would have thought, right? But that's how it happened, thank God. By that time, my Jack and I already had a beautiful house with a large backyard, a beautiful fruit garden that I took care of with great affection. He had bought it for us years ago. I never went back to working outside the home. I was a housewife, and my greatest pleasure was taking care of my family. And then out of nowhere, God blesses me with this miracle. Being pregnant was a novelty for me. The women in the family were very excited. They considered our lives a real miracle, because of Jack having discovered his brother and being saved from that disease that had already condemned him. It was beautiful to see my big belly growing. How good it was. I would spend hours caressing my belly, talking to the baby. And Jack, well, he was constantly with his hand on my belly, waiting to feel. When the time came, a beautiful baby girl was born, with golden hair just like her father. We named her Victoria. There was no name more fitting, right? She truly was a victory for us after everything we had been through. Victoria is the light in our home. Together with the rest of the family, everything is now complete. It was so beautiful to see Emily, now a mother of 2, helping take care of her youngest sister. Ben, my grandson, was born about 3 months before Victoria. Being pregnant at the same time was a very meaningful experience for me and my daughter. As for Jack, he seemed to become 20 years younger. He was always playing, telling stories, and singing to Victoria. Then there was Michael. Oh, he fell seriously ill. It's a story that, even though I was feeling happiness with Victoria's birth, deep down Jack, Emily, and I were in great sorrow. Unfortunately, he was found unconscious on the floor by a tenant. Thank God they helped in time, but he had suffered a stroke. Michael's stroke was an ischemic stroke, which happens when a blood clot blocks blood flow to part of the brain. This caused his left side to be paralyzed. The doctors explained that when brain cells don't get oxygen, they start to die quickly. When we visited him in the hospital, our hearts were broken. Michael, who used to be so active and full of life, was now lying in bed, almost unable to speak. The left side of his face was drooping, and he couldn't move his left arm and leg. The doctors said that the recovery process would be slow and difficult. He would need physical therapy, speech therapy, and a lot of support from the family. His speech was slurred and hard to understand, and he even had trouble swallowing. Seeing Michael in that state was a shock to all of us. It was a time of many prayers and much faith. We prayed to God for strength to face this challenge and for Michael's recovery. It was difficult, but we didn't lose hope. One of Michael's children, Ricardiez, the same one who had caused the chaos at the old house, came to see us at the hospital. He came with a humble attitude, apologizing, asking for forgiveness. You could see that he truly regretted his actions. He said he had seen how much we cared for his father at the hospital, how we were genuinely concerned. That touched him, It made him see things in a different light. But then came the hard part. He said he had to take Michael back to his home in another city. He said his father couldn't live alone anymore after the stroke, that he needed continuous care. Deep down, I thought it was the right thing to do. After all, he was his son, and at least he wasn't abandoning Michael in a nursing home, right? It showed that he still cared for his father. We forgave him, yes. There's no point in holding grudges, especially at a time like this. What mattered was Michael's well-being. Saying goodbye was so hard. We knew we might never see Michael again. Jack was in shock. Emily cried a lot. I tried to be strong, but inside my heart was shattered. When they left, taking Michael with them, it felt like they were taking a part of us. We stood there, watching the car leave with a lump in our throats and tears in our eyes. Sometimes life forces us to make difficult decisions. We wanted to be able to take care of Michael, but we understood that it might be better for him to be with his own family right now, especially since we had children who demanded a lot of our time. We never saw Michael again after that, but he will forever remain in our hearts. We always remember him with affection, the stories he told, the way he laughed, how he loved Emily. If you've listened to me up until now, write "God works miracles" in the comments, and I will send you a little heart in return. Telling this story really makes me realize how God was there with us every step of the way through the highs and the lows. He never left us, no matter what. And that's why I truly believe that God works miracles. My life is living proof of that. Through all of this, I've also learned how important forgiveness is. Sometimes, holding on to grudges can weigh us down, but choosing to forgive brings peace, not just to others, but to ourselves too. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, I invite you to do so now. You'll get to hear real stories from grandparents every week, stories that will inspire and remind you of the power of love and faith. So, go ahead, hit that subscribe button and join us for more heartfelt moments.